This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were ever going to get any money back. And then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. All so you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. Usually I'd say through my website, but we're redoing the whole website, so just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Our guest today is Kit Klarenberg. You can find him at Kit Klarenberg at substack.com. He also contributes to the Gray Zones. You could find him over there too as well. You can find him on Twitter easily enough at Kit Klarenberg, Kit Klarenberg on Twitter, and follow him there as well. Mr. Kit Klarenberg, are you there?
Hey, how's it going?
It's going good, my friend. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Tell the audience about yourself. Who is Kit Klarenberg?
I'm just some guy with an internet connection, I think, to a large extent. But I'm an investigative journalist. I typically cover the impact of intelligence services on politics and perceptions globally. And lately, I've been doing a lot of work on Paul Mason, who is this British journalist, supposedly on the left, who actually appears to be an infiltrator, and British intelligence asset, who's trying to undermine the anti-war, anti-imperialist left from within. And so, if you go onto Gray Zone, my Gray Zone profile, you'll find some of my recent reports on that.
Yeah, we definitely have to have you come back and talk about this Paul Mason thing. You know me, I'm like, I don't follow global politics that much, but I've heard the story a bit. Paul Mason, like you said, he's a leftist, but purports to be a leftist, but he's working for intelligence, right? He's on the payroll or something, right?
Yeah. Well, it very much seems that his activities are being kind of coordinated directly with, if not, outright managed and directed by a very specific individual within British intelligence who has a very long history of engaging in quote-unquote counter disinformation, but that typically seems to amount to censorship of dissenting voices and the public smearing and ostracization of troublesome figures like Jeremy Corbyn. But another major aspect of my work earlier this year involves another intelligence asset, or seeming intelligence asset, which is, of course, Jeffrey Epstein. I know that you've covered his quote-unquote suicide fairly extensively in the past. But I think that one of the major things that people seem to have missed was the New York Times. They published, they called it the Epstein Files. I think it was a series of articles based on 10,000 pages of Bureau of Prison documents released to the outlet under FOI, and that very much the narrative with all of their reporting was that yes, this actually proves that Epstein killed himself, and they had this vast team of reporters working on it, and so they didn't publish most of the underlying documents upon which their work was based. So I just figured, well, I'll just file an FOI to get the material that they got, and I was sent over 10,000 pages in PDF form of these documents, which was quite difficult to navigate, at least at first. But one of the things that really kind of jumped out to me from even an initial reading was all of the bizarre anomalies and discrepancies and contradictions around his Jeffrey's first alleged suicide attempt, this was in allegedly in the early hours of July 23rd, 2019, and this is about 2.5 weeks after he was imprisoned on charges of child sex trafficking. And yes, so I mean, essentially the story that was told in the media, and this was well publicized in at the time, was that yes, he was found with marks of an unspecified nature around his neck. What got a lot less coverage was the fact that he claimed to remember absolutely nothing about what happened, and his cellmate, who that Man Mountain former NYPD officer Nicholas Tartaglione, who was coincidentally shared the same legal representation as Ghislaine Maxwell, said that he didn't know anything either. And in the files, it's clear that at roughly the time this is claimed to have happened, prison officials recorded an attempted suicide by hanging slash asphyxiation. This was officially logged, and this is reflected in the files. There's an enormous amount of redactions, notably potentially the name of the person who authored the report, and there are huge gaps in the record, in records related to his examination by a doctor, kind of 5 or 6 hours later, which seems rather belated if someone's actually attempted to kill themselves. And so, bizarrely, given this alleged attempt to take his own life, he was taken off suicide watch. And we'll return to this point later. But what wasn't reported was that he was charged with violating Prison Code 228, which covers tattooing or self-mutilation. And this is really quite striking because subsequently, for no apparent reason, it's only 2 weeks later, on July 30th, that the report of his attempted suicide is changed to include self-mutilation via laceration. Although the doctor's report from just hours after he allegedly tried to kill himself doesn't mention lacerations at all. So this begs the very obvious question of why this was written into the official record, days later. It explicitly, the doctor's report explicitly states that no lacerations were found on more than one occasion. But I mean, that in itself is just very bizarre. And he would, but yes, while this was going on, he was subject to an official investigation for this breach, and he was moved into solitary confinement away. So he was moved away from Tartaglione, who was a friend of his, and they got on very well, and they would walk to meet their lawyers together. And I think that this, in psychological assessments at the time, Epstein expresses kind of a degree of confidence and optimism about his situation, and he says that he doesn't feel under threat from staff or guards or any other inmates. And I think having this huge, Tartaglione was obviously awaiting trial for his role in a cocaine dealing conspiracy where he allegedly killed 4 people. I mean, he was obviously not someone to be messed with. Strangled one of his alleged victims with a zip tie, it is said. But he's in solitary while this review is being conducted. And it's again, for unspecified reasons, stated that it was not appropriate for Epstein to be housed with other inmates, and so this just goes on and on and on. And he was interviewed, but under the terms of this investigation, and was judged to be rude and uncooperative, and with a poor attitude. And then no witnesses were requested to give evidence in support of the fact that he'd broken this penal code. And so they eventually rule that the charges have merit, and they bounce it upstairs for quote unquote further disposition. And it appeared he died before the final decision was made. But then in an internal Bureau of Prisons memo related to this incident, which was published 5 days after he died, it states that the charges related to self-mutilation had been expunged, i.e., stricken from the record as if they never happened. So, what the hell was going on here? we have this story that he attempted to kill himself, and then yet, he apparently knows nothing about it, and neither does his cellmate. We're told, yes, that it was by a hanging, although, with subsequent, many days later, it's claimed to be, that he slashed his wrists or something. It doesn't make any sense, and I think that it's crazy, but also kind of unsurprising that America's paper of records somehow managed to miss this. And also you've got to bear in mind as well that in the wake of his suicide, the Bureau of Prisons, it seems, again this is clear from the classified files, that they were attempting to forge a narrative in the media about what happened and why. And there was this very strange incident in kind of mid-August 2019, which was a few days after Epstein died, where the New York Post published this exclusive claiming that Epstein had informed his lawyers that Tartaglione roughed him up, and this is why he was discovered out cold in his cell in this alleged suicide attempt. So it's just, the more that you probe at this, the more kind of complicated it becomes. This has never been resolved. It's never been reported on in the mainstream media, and it is this huge kind of gaping hole in the official narrative. And it immediately sprang to mind, I believe it was yesterday, that Ghislaine Maxwell was said to be on suicide watch, and an obvious suspicion to that arises from that is that she, likewise, that we are the ground is being prepared for her being suicided, or something else. But yeah, I mean, and I think that the idea that he tried to commit suicide the first time is so that was initially central to claims that he had taken his own life and that there was no foul play involved. But then, yes, that when you actually strip it away, there's no evidence that this actually happened, and we have no idea what if anything did happen.
Let me ask you a couple of questions.
Sure.
One is that Tartaglione. What do we know about the disposition of his case as of today?
I mean, I don't think we've heard anything, have we? I mean, he seems to have disappeared into the ether.
Okay. Now, also, we were talking off the air, too. You were talking about the whole thing about Ghislaine possibly being suicided as well. And for the audience, NT Lawyer, from Crazy Days and Nights, we've had him on the show here twice. He seems to be in the know of a lot of stuff. He's been predicting that the U.S. is going to trade Ghislaine Maxwell for Julian Assange, and then when Assange gets here to the United States, he's going to wind up suicided in his cell. So just keep that. Let's get that out there, okay? So let's get that out there on the record. So if it does happen, man, I can at least say I told you first. Oh my God. Okay, so MDC, he's in the cell there with this guy Tartaglione, who's. You're right. It's odd to put him in a cell with a guy like that to begin with. He's wanted for murder. He's being charged with a murder, a homicide, and here you have Epstein charged with decades-old sexual crimes. It would odd that those two would be matched up in a cell. Is one odd situation. Also,
it's very, very, very strange, and it's just like that. I mean, I think that there was a lot of. I think John McAfee was kind of led the charge on this, but there was a lot of speculation at the time that that Tartaglione was responsible, and you just got to think like, well, yeah, I mean, it would if you want to set up, say, a patsy, like I mean, or indeed, for to create kind of false conspiracy theories around what happened, then he was the ideal candidate. I mean, of course, yes, he'd been, he was not Epstein's cellmate at the time he actually died. This was this individual called Ephraim Reyes, I believe. His nickname is Stone, and I think that there's there's another very interesting aspect to these declassified files, which is that, again, this was actually one of the files that the New York Times published, but that no one seems to have noted this. I mean, I'm not sure if anyone actually read their reporting because it was so poor and unexceptional. But yeah, so effectively, this there's a document which states that Reyes was receiving funds from Epstein's attorneys for quote unquote unknown reasons. Again, this is something which has disappeared from the official narrative. Reyes was released I mean, he was cooperating, I think, with with the FBI's investigation of Epstein's death, and he was released from prison in April 2020 due to a facility-wide COVID-19 outbreak.
Well, wait a second. Are you saying that Epstein had a cellmate named Reyes at the time of the suicide?
Yeah, I mean, he'd actually essentially that was in theory his cellmate. That raised because he was in court on he was spending an extended period in court, that he wasn't going to be bunking with Epstein that night, and there was discussion in the files about how, well, we need to find Epstein a new cellmate, but then nothing seems to have come from this, and it's like, that is a clear breach of the prison's the prison guidance. And they also the people who were meant to be guarding Epstein were, they ended up getting charged with, kind of gross professional misconduct, because they were meant to be checking his cell every 50, because he was, on suicide watch. They were meant to be checking his cell every 15 minutes, and they failed to follow basic procedures. And this is also a time when 2 cameras in the vicinity of his cell mysteriously malfunction, and that a third in a nearby hallway also becomes corrupted. We're told that some footage in some areas relevant to the investigation of his alleged suicide exists, but they've not been released publicly. And the two guards who admitted openly to fabricating log entries saying that they were doing regular checks when they weren't, they were charged with lying on prison records, but then the charges were summarily dropped on just in December 2020, and this wasn't disclosed publicly until December 30th, which is a day after Maxwell was found guilty of recruiting December 30th last year, when Maxwell was found guilty of recruiting and trafficking young girls for sexual abuse. Again, there are so many different dimensions to this, and none of it makes sense. It's all just so obviously suspicious, but it's just been completely forgotten. Because
I'm hearing a lot of new stuff right now for myself for the first time now. The 2 corrections officers that were disciplined, you're saying that those charges were dropped. They still have their jobs today?
Yeah. Like they were, facing serious penalties, and the charges were dropped. The prosecutions ended. I think that the kind of the distortion that goes on in these documents is really something to behold. And the New York Times is actually willingly complicit in this. Is like I said, is that they go so hard trying to shape a narrative that actually, yes, that all of Epstein's statements are somehow directly or indirectly proof that he did kill himself. And that I mentioned the psychological assessment, which concluded that he said that he felt safe and that he didn't feel he was under threat and that sort of thing. The New York Times, they frame his insistence that he had no intention of committing suicide as a testament to his life of manipulation and enormous skill at deceiving others and ability to create illusions. And another obvious interpretation is that these denials were sincere, but that doesn't get considered. But there's this is particularly significant because one of the most shocking things that I found in these classified files is there was a they call it a reconstruction of Epstein's suicide, and it began to be conducted by excuse me. Yes, the Bureau of Prisons launched an investigation into Epstein's suicide almost immediately after it was reported after it was been confirmed that he was dead, and so he arrives at Metropolitan Correctional Center on the morning of August 13th, 2019. Just hours after this happened, to commence his investigation, and he writes this reconstruction, which it acknowledges that enormous amounts of vital evidence was not available to him over the course of his probe because it was confiscated by the FBI, or that or it didn't exist in the first place, like the malfunctioning video cameras. And so there's a very striking passage in it where they where he concludes that the reason that Epstein committed suicide because he was terrified about his future and the prospect of being sent to prison for life, and he draws repeated attention to Epstein declaring himself on several occasions to be a to be a coward. He kept on saying, I'm a coward in psychological meetings with psychologists and assessments. And this is really quite shocking, because if you actually read the declassified records of these meetings, he's very, very clearly referring to himself as a coward in the explicit context of not being able to kill himself. So he states, well, I'm such a coward that I can't stand any pain, and I don't even like giving blood, so I would never harm myself. But then this is completely distorted into, this is actually proof that he wants to kill himself. And this is a staggeringly dishonest inversion, which, yes, the New York Times has just completely gone along with. And I think serious questions need to be asked about whether they were witting or unwitting dupes in this, because the evidence was right there in front of them, black and white, but they seem to have missed it.
MDC, okay, I've been there in the 80s. I've been into that in jail. Okay, and it has a notorious reputation, especially back in those days, of being of a corrupt jail and of contraband coming into the jails. I know two people. I've had two guests on this show who did over a year in MDC. AJ Weberman did over a year in MDC, and Hoffenberg. What's his name? Stephen Hoffenberg, who was Jeffrey Epstein's partner and boss over at Tower Financial. He did time in a waiting trial at MDC. And one of the things that always struck me, previous to this conversation with you today, was that they found what I believe to be contraband in the suicide cell in the form of other jumpsuits and other sheets. But now you're telling me that there was another inmate assigned to that cell. Do we know the contents of that cell and what belonged to who? Has there ever been an itemization and an accounting of which jumpsuits and which sheets and pillowcases belong to who? I don't think that's ever been conducted, and it's like, and I think that, yes, it just does seem that that Epstein had an enormous amount of material at his disposal to fashion an effective news. But even then, Ray's, I mentioned that he, knew Epstein, obviously because they shared a cell together. But I think that they spoke a lot, and quite clearly, if he was receiving payments from Epstein's attorneys, maybe that was to protect him or to pass on information to them, and we don't know. Again, this has never been revealed publicly prior to my reporting, and it's it should be explained that Ray's was as I said, he was released in prison in April 2020, and then subsequent to this, he stays very, very quiet, and he dies due to alleged COVID complications. But then his niece, in the wake of his death, was all over the media saying that he had frequently dismissed the suggestion that Epstein could have killed himself, because Epstein was 6 foot. And it would be very difficult to hang yourself from a kind of small, low bunk frame in that cell. He just didn't believe it. And there's also the question of whether he was allegedly quizzed by Durham, but then there's again some oddity around here where essentially. Like I said, he was a person of interest in the FBI probe, and then it was also reported. That he was interviewed personally by William Barr, and his niece has supported this account. This is part of the Justice Department Office of Inspector General's probe into what happened. But then strangely, the DOJ has refused to confirm or deny whether this actually happened. And then a former spokesman, Kerry Kupek, she says that the idea that this ever happened is 100% false. So, again, what was going on here? But whatever the truth of the matter, I think that he was very, very, very well placed to know whether Epstein could or indeed wanted to kill himself in that cell, and but by all accounts, he was completely opposed to the idea. And then
then, yes, yet more further weirdness. In January 2021, federal prosecutors ruled that all records related to Ray's time in prison would remain sealed, despite all of these requests from disclosure from his journalists and his family as well. And they said that the reason that we're not releasing this is because of its potential to impact issues unrelated to Epstein, even though when they listed the information in the files, kind of bullet pointed, related in the files related to Ray's, which referred to Epstein, all of it was redacted. So I mean, quite clearly, that is a key reason that it's remaining sealed. And I think, we were told at the very start of this year that the Inspector General report on Epstein's death was nearly done, and a Justice Department investigator said that all investigators are doing dotting their I's and crossing their T's, and it should be out by kind of February or March. And then yes, we've not heard anything about this. So where is that? And it's like, again, I find it incredible that the media interest in this has waned, given that Maxwell has by and large remained at least every so often in the headlines over the first half of this year. I mean, again, it just strikes me that this is direct collusion here. This is people have been told to keep quiet about it, and they are.
Well, there was about 9 years of media on disinterest in this until Judy Brown was allowed to break the news, break the case.
Yeah. Well, it just, I mean, I greatly enjoyed, Judy Brown's reporting, but I mean, I do think that it just struck me that she has, she's rightly been praised for it to a degree, but I just thought that there's like the narrative that her reporting was what led to Epstein being reinvestigated again. It just didn't ring true. I just think that that's not how the media works. And that's the stuff that appears in movies like All the President's Men. I strongly suspect that. I have no evidence for this, but I strongly suspect that a decision was basically made for one reason or another to throw him under the bus at last.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. A couple of quick questions before we take a break. Did you look into the changing of the will and the trust right prior to the suicide?
Yeah, a bit of that. This is another key, another kind of. It's stated as a kind of key bit of evidence or indication that he was trying to kill himself. I don't see it. I think that actually he was, it seemed like he was actually trying to rejig his financial affairs. So, in the event of a kind of a court settlement, because remember, that his 2008 plea deal was that yes, he would pay some money to the victims' families, and then he would be in kind of this minimum security prison, allowed to go out during the day, and yes, all of his named and also any potential co-conspirators, which is just this crazily sweeping and yes, extremely generous plea deal, the likes of which have never been seen before or since in the history of American jurisprudence. I strongly suspect that he was effectively trying to shield some of his assets. I don't see it as an indication of suicide at all.
Okay, very interesting. And there was that strange appointment of that backup executor who, when you look into his lifestyle and his boyfriend and model airplane pilot, what's going on? When I found that guy's Instagram and I started talking about that, everything was scrubbed like a week later.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. That was pretty intense stuff. What about now in your investigation of this? Any indications that there was no suicide, there was no murder, that he was just walked out of there?
I mean, I have wondered about this, and I think that that they did that classic thing of, I'm not sure if you recall, but in the kind of the wake of Osama bin Laden, being killed, but or allegedly killed, but there were those photos that were circulated of Obama and others watching it in the White House Situation Room, right. And then there was also a widely circulated photo on Facebook, purporting to show Osama bin Laden dead, and both of these subsequently were announced to be fakes, that that Obama hadn't been watching it live, and that this photo was just fabricated whole cloth. But I think the kind of visceral initial reaction of that went a long way to cementing the idea that yes, that this did happen. And then this is the same with Epstein, where we have this one picture of him with a kind of very pronounced, purportedly of him with very pronounced bruise, which would tend to suggest to a layman or a lay person that yes, that this was a suicide via hanging. We haven't seen that since. Again, it's not talked about, but it would be entirely unsurprising. It would be I say entirely unsurprising. I mean, it's at least plausible that yes, that this was all just a kind of psychological operation, and that he was wished safety. I mean, like I say, it's quite incredible. We were told for months on end that, well, hey, he already had suicidal intent, and he already tried to do it once before this, and he was put on suicide watch as a result. But then there's no indication that this event actually happened.
No, and it's very interesting too how this viral phrase "Epstein didn't kill himself" just took off across the world, just all organically, all by itself, and no one ever said, "Hey, Epstein walked out of there alive."
Indeed.
Yeah, all right. That one never hit the presses, but Epstein didn't kill himself. People love to say that. Just like they love to talk about the pedophile island and the Lolita Express and all these other things that want to make you look over there, and not at New York and Florida. Okay, let's.
I think just really quickly as well, is that one of, again, this got memory hold, and again, strikingly, there's this Twitter account that was tracking Maxwell's trial, that was kind of live tweeting it, and was kind of publishing all these bombshell revelations that somehow never managed to make it into the media. Then they got banned from Twitter twice, permanently, and that they seem to have disappeared off the face of the map. But there was that reference to how when they raided Epstein's houses again in 2019, they found in his New York apartment a bunch of evidence that was already bagged up with FBI tape. Why? It's again just like no one's asked any questions. It's just like, was this just did he do this himself just in advance because he knew they were coming, or somehow did he not get around to unboxing the stuff for 11 years? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, it also, too, always struck me, too, is the school's transcripts that they found at the first search warrant at the Palm Beach mansion. He had the school transcripts of these kids. No investigation at the school. How do you get these things? Over and over. We're talking today to Kit Klarenberg. Great new information we just got about the Epstein death and whatever mysterious situation over there at MDC. You can find Kit Klarenberg at substack.com. Also, he's doing some great work on the Gray Zone about the Paul Masson story, which is out there going on in the UK. And also, too, you can find him on Twitter at Kit Klarenberg. And those are both Ks, KIT, KLARENBERG. Mr. Kit Klarenberg, I know you did some work, too, about the CIA and child experiments. What do you got on that? We only got about 15 minutes, but what do you got on that?
Okay.
We'll have you back, though, yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh no, absolutely.
Yeah.
It would be my pleasure. But yeah, I mean, I think just really quickly, earlier this year, it was. I mean, again, this kind of January I reported on this, and essentially it was revealed that the CIA had funded these experiments on Danish children, many of them orphans, for decades. I mean, and it's just absolutely shocking. I mean, the trials were in blatant conflict with the Nuremberg Code, which enforces the vital requirement of obtaining informed consent from human subjects, which is I mean, this is a recurring theme of CIA human experimentation. But so there's this Danish documentarian who was as a child swept up in this, was offered the opportunity to do something quote unquote fun and some financial inducements, and he underwent all of these at times highly invasive psychological and physical tests. He had to listen for hours to recordings of loud noises and screams, and he was strapped into a chair while electrodes were attached to him and whatnot. And this carried on until he was 20, in his mid-20s, and he subsequently learned that in the wake of this, that whenever he went to a hospital just for something like a basic skin complaint or something, that all of his all of his contact with Danish healthcare services were being reported to the country's National Psychological Institute, and they wouldn't disclose why. And he kind of, one way or another, much later on, starts wondering if he was the subject of a highly unethical scientific experiment. And doing some studious digging into local archives, he found out that this was part of MK Ultra. Now, MK Ultra, as your listeners will likely well know, was a wide-ranging CIA torture and mind control experimentation program where largely unwitting people, or at least unconsenting people, were tested on. They were spiked with LSD. They underwent very, very cruel and kind of often psychologically and physically ravaging tests and injustices. But then one of the reasons that this is particularly perverse, I think, is because there's a CIA torture manual. It's called the Kubak Interrogation Manual, and it advocates the kind of things that MK Ultra test subjects were subjected to, which is the use of electric shock and threats, fear, sensory deprivation, and there's a passage in it where it says that one of the benefits of these forms of torture is that the effect of them is regression, and a subject's quote-unquote mature defenses crumble as they become more childlike. And the CIA considered it very useful to intensify such feeling. So it very much seems that children were a very specific target of CIA torture techniques. Now, what happened in Denmark is very well evidenced by publicly available files in the National Archives, even though Danish authorities started destroying them when this documentarian started probing. So quite clearly, the cover-up continues, 50 years later. But something that occurred to me was that in Germany, it's been a kind of ongoing and ever intensifying scandal, which you don't actually hear much about in kind of the US or the UK. But for decades in what was West Germany, which was the former occupation zones of France, the US, and Britain, which was a country from 1949 until 1989. Essentially, right around the same time that these Danish experiments were happening, the German state was dabbling in paedophilia. So they were advocating placing at-risk youths and orphans with paedophiles, because on the ostensible basis that these would be loving environments that would help effectively integrate them into society. And the kind of lead figure in this was this psychologist called Helmut Kendler, and he was a very, very prominent kind of advocate for sexual liberation in Germany. And shockingly, even though it was known that he pioneered these experiments, if you can even call it that, even when he died, there were these obituaries that kind of praised him as this kind of virtuous fighter for sexual morality. And it's only really recently that this has been kind of challenged critically, and there have been official investigations and witnesses coming forward. And it's very, very clear that German authorities across the country were literally enthusiastically offering up children to be placed with paedophiles in the knowledge that they were likely to be sexually abused, and they ignored complaints from children or concerned citizens who found out about this, and this went on for 30-40 years. There were even all lesbian paedophile communities in Berlin, which again were just kind of forgotten about and been memory hold until now. I mean, if the CIA wasn't involved, I would be surprised. We don't have the documents attesting to that, but the influence of the CIA in West Germany was absolutely massive, and it was a key because of its being the front line with the Soviet bloc via Berlin. It was considered of enormous importance by the CIA, and they were running around. They were involved with heavily penetrated every major political party. Were heavily involved involved in managing and kickstarting various kind of social movements and stuff. So it would be entirely unsurprising if they're involved in this. And again, not only the citizens of Germany, but the citizens across the Western world, they need answers, and we need to know where else this kind of thing happened.
Yeah, I've done a bunch of shows about Northern Ireland during the Troubles, too, where there seemed to be rampant going on, and maybe the motivation behind the murder of Lord Mountbatten. And Richard, the Kinkera Home for Boys, and also Richard Kerr's been on our show talking about being sex trafficked by Roy Cohen. But I really encourage the audience to go back and check out, if you go to Patreon, I did an interview with a guy named Steve Smith, who wrote a book called The Psychopath Machine, a story of resistance and survival, who was, this is, widely documented MK Ultra experiments that took place in Canada. I forget what the place was. It was in a psychiatric institution there, where the director of the institution actually took in one of these psychopathic murderers who went to work as a mercenary in South Africa and then came back and lived with the doctor at his home. Okay. Yeah, like we're talking, oh my God, yeah. This is one of the most well laid out stories of MK Ultra survival, a real one that I've ever heard, because there's so many crazy stories. Everyone out there is an MK Ultra survivor now.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
but it's just, but there's a fantastic independent researcher called Jeff Kay, who is he very kindly helped me out with my work on several occasions. He has interviewed victims of very real victims of MK Ultra who have the receipts to prove. It was absolutely monstrous where they were left with not only no memories, but just no kind of emotional or intelligence or situational awareness. It was just their minds were literally just destroyed, these blank slates created. And the CIA's purpose in doing this was in order to implant new behaviors and even memories onto them. And then of course I've written about this for Mint Press, in Guantanamo Bay, a lot of the same techniques that were used in MK Ultra were used on the inmates. And of course the very obvious purpose of this was in order to create blank slates onto which they could program confessions. Therefore the inmates would admit to crimes that they never committed, or they couldn't have committed, like blowing up buildings that didn't exist at the time of their capture. So the US could justify this global terror threat, resulting in endless civil liberty crackdowns at home and these the illegal wars of aggression abroad. So the idea, it's a very common trope that the MK Ultra experiments were useless and that they didn't work, but quite clearly they are valued to this very day.
Oh no, and these tactics were used in the Phoenix program in Vietnam. They were used at Abu Ghraib, and they were used, like you said, at Gitmo. And you hear these stories, especially Abu Ghraib. You hear these stories over and over, where first they would kidnap the head of the household, and then they would kidnap his children later on and rape his children in front of the guy to get him to confess and like you said, to admit things and come up with crazy stories. Oh my God! And
cheery stuff for Monday.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, day after day. And Doug Valentine's done some great work on what do you call it? The Phoenix program. And it's great stuff out there. But people doing great work on these horrific topics. So what are you working on next? What do you got on your plate next over there?
Yeah, well, I think I'm going to continue with this Paul Mason stuff. It'd be great to come back on and talk to you about it. I think that this is, I think it's so important because this is emblematic of just he's just one journalist. Operation Mockingbird. How many journalists do you think are being, directed and managed and serving as effective agents of intelligence services in Britain and America, particularly since the start of the war in Ukraine? Where London in Washington have a very specific narrative of what's happening they want to protect and further. And of course, Jesus Christ, in March, the White House had a all hands briefing of top TikTok influencers, where Pentagon officials were speaking to TikTok personalities about what US aims were in Ukraine, so they could get their messaging right in videos. I think in years to come, we will learn about quite a few more Paul Masons stateside and in the UK who were acting as state propagandists and helping to target, undermine, censor and deplatform genuine independent alternative journalists, researchers, academics, activists, civil society voices. So yeah, it's emblematic.
Yeah. And I've seen a lot of it myself firsthand, especially we're talking about Epstein. Like when the first Epstein arrest first happened and then the death, I was contacted by journalists all over the world, trying to manipulate the story and, or getting things. I thought they were being naive and getting things wrong, but now later on I've learned a lot of it was planted in there. And of course, I've seen firsthand catch and kill stuff. We've been talking to, thank you so much, Kit. By the way, I want the audience to know that good old Kit Klarenberg here, we had to reschedule this interview because I had no air conditioning. And I was bringing in air conditioning contractors, so they were very, very patient and accommodating to me. So I thank you very much, Kit.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And if you hear that thumping around going on there with Kit, he's been wrestling an alligator throughout the entire interview. If you've been hearing all that thumping and whatever he's doing over there, man. Kit, are you okay, man? Are you wrestling someone?
I'm absolutely fine. Okay. All the better for speaking to you, Ed.
Yeah, a little thumping and rumbling over there. But Kit Klarenberg at substack.com. You can find him there. You can find him on the Gray Zone, talking about Paul Masson. Kit Klarenberg, 2 Ks. Kit Klarenberg on Twitter. Mr. Klarenberg, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
My pleasure. Take care, Ed.
Good night, sir.
You.
Good night.
Bye-bye.